In 1993, the western United States was far more than just a geographical region. It was a full-blown spectacle. That year, the region didn't simply exist, it performed. From political drama and cultural milestones to raging wildfires, legal showdowns, and moments of sheer absurdity, the West Coast seemed to offer a highlight reel of the era's chaos, charm, and contradictions. The headlines were nonstop, the stories both strange and significant, and the pace relentless. Every month seemed to bring with it another jaw-dropping headline or cultural flashpoint, ensuring that boredom was never on the itinerary. Whether you were following the entertainment industry, political developments, social upheavals, or natural disasters, the Pacific Coast served it all up with flair, drama, and plenty of unpredictability. The year 1993 kicked off with a jarring start, both figuratively and literally. On January 5th, the state of Washington drew national attention when it carried out the country's first legal hanging in nearly 3 decades. The execution of convicted child murderer Wesley Allen Dodd marked a chilling and controversial moment in the American justice system. It was the first use of the gallows since 1965, and although the method had long been viewed as outdated and barbaric by many, Dodd himself had requested it, believing it to be fitting for his crimes. The event sparked debates across the country about capital punishment and the use of such archaic methods in a modern era. In the Pacific Northwest, where the execution took place, the news sent shockwaves through communities that were still grappling with the horrors of Dodd's crimes and the moral weight of the state's decision. Just a couple of weeks later, a different kind of history was being made, this time on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. On January 20th, as winter chill clung to Washington, D.C., Americans from coast to coast tuned in to witness a symbolic changing of the guard. Bill Clinton was sworn in as the 42nd President of the United States, ushering in a new political era after 12 years of Republican leadership under Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Standing beside him was Al Gore, taking his oath as Vice President. From the cities of California to the snowy peaks of the Rockies, people watched the ceremonies with cautious optimism or skeptical curiosity, depending on their politics. Clinton, a Southern Democrat with a taste for rock and roll and a reputation for charisma, brought a fresh tone to the White House. To many in the West, especially younger voters and those drawn to the cultural shift of the early 90s, his presidency felt like a break from the past. With his saxophone skills, youthful energy, and talk of a new covenant, Clinton seemed to embody the flannel-wrapped, MTV-informed spirit of the times. The country stood on the brink of change, and out west, where change often gallops ahead of the rest, the mood was one of nervous anticipation and cultural curiosity. National headlines in late February were dominated by the shocking and tragic bombing of the World Trade Center on February 26, when a van packed with explosives detonated in a parking garage beneath the North Tower, killing 6 people and injuring over 1,000. The attack stunned the country and served as a grim wake-up call about the threat of domestic and international terrorism. But while the East Coast reeled from the explosion, tensions were escalating elsewhere in the country, particularly in the West. Just 2 days later, on February 28th, federal agents launched a high-profile and highly controversial raid on the Branch Davidian compound near Waco, Texas. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms had obtained a warrant to arrest the group's leader, David Koresh, on federal firearms violations. The attempted arrest quickly turned into a deadly shootout, leaving 4 federal agents and 5 Branch Davidian members dead and sparking what would become a tense 51-day standoff. This incident gripped the nation's attention and dominated news cycles well into the spring. In California, where recent memories of civil unrest still lingered, the Waco raid struck a particularly raw nerve. The state had only recently emerged from the aftermath of the 1992 Los Angeles riots, which were triggered by the acquittal of 4 LAPD officers in the brutal beating of Rodney King. Communities across Los Angeles, and in many parts of the state, were still deeply skeptical of law enforcement and the use of excessive force. The images coming out of Waco, military-style vehicles, armed agents, and a besieged religious group, felt all too familiar to Californians already grappling with their own complicated relationship with authority and justice. Many tuned in anxiously as the events in Texas unfolded, wondering how far the government was willing to go and whether the lessons of LA had really been learned. The Rodney King saga returned to national headlines in March of 1993, bringing renewed attention to the long-running tensions between law enforcement and communities of color, particularly in Los Angeles. King, whose brutal beating by LAPD officers in 1991 had been caught on video and widely broadcast, took the witness stand during the federal civil rights trial of the officers involved. His testimony was emotional and closely watched, a stark reminder of the deep racial wounds that remained fresh in the city just a year after the 1992 riots. The trial represented a critical moment for both the justice system and public trust in policing. But not everything in Los Angeles that marched revolved around courtrooms and controversy. Just a few miles away from the courthouse, the entertainment capital was preparing for its biggest night of the year. On March 29th, the Academy Awards rolled out the red carpet at the iconic Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, drawing Hollywood's brightest stars for an evening of glamour and celebration. Clint Eastwood's gritty western Unforgiven dominated the ceremony, winning 4 Oscars including Best Picture and Best Director. The film's dark themes of justice, vengeance, and moral ambiguity echoed in their own cinematic way the real-life issues playing out in the city. In a year where the line between hero and villain seemed blurred, both on screen and off, Unforgiven captured the mood of the moment, raw, reflective, and unmistakably American. As the 51-day standoff between federal agents and the Branch Davidians came to a horrifying conclusion on April 19th with a deadly fire engulfing the compound near Waco, Texas, the western United States was facing its own unsettling crisis, one that didn't involve guns or fire, but something far more invisible and insidious. In the remote, arid landscape of the Four Corners region, where Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona meet, a strange and fast-moving illness began to spread. People, seemingly healthy one day, were suddenly falling critically ill with severe respiratory symptoms that often proved fatal within hours. Doctors were perplexed, communities grew anxious, and fear spread as fast as the sickness itself. Scientists and public health officials scrambled to understand the new disease, and it wasn't until weeks later that they traced the cause to a virus carried by deer mice. The illness would eventually be identified as hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare but deadly infection. By the end of 1993, it had claimed the lives of 13 people in the Southwest, leaving the region with more questions than answers and a newfound awareness of the dangers lurking even in its vast, open wilderness. Meanwhile, far from the desert and mountain towns affected by the outbreak, the mood was very different in San Francisco. On the coast, at the storied Cow Palace venue, the grunge movement was making itself heard in a way that felt both raw and purposeful. Nirvana, already the torchbearers of a cultural shift away from polished pop toward angst-filled authenticity, took the stage for a benefit concert aimed at helping victims of war in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The show was loud, electric, and full of emotion. Fans packed the arena, screaming lyrics and soaking in the presence of a band that had become the voice of a generation. Kurt Cobain, still very much alive and idolized at this point, played with the kind of passion that would become legendary. The benefit performance wasn't just a fundraiser, it was a statement, a reminder that even in the grunge world of disaffection and disillusionment, compassion and global awareness still had a place. In that moment, Cobain wasn't just a reluctant rock star, he was a cultural icon, and the show helped solidify his role in the broader story of 1990s America. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, a very different kind of darkness cast its shadow over the summer. On May 1993, news broke that pop superstar Michael Jackson had been accused of abusing a 13-year-old boy. The allegations, shocking and salacious, sparked an immediate media frenzy. The story dominated television broadcasts, tabloids, and dinner table conversations for months to come, with reporters camped outside Neverland Ranch and legal analysts speculating endlessly on talk shows. The case quickly became one of the most high-profile celebrity scandals of the decade, igniting fierce debates over truth, fame, and the limits of public trust. Whether viewed as a fallen icon or a victim of extortion, Jackson's place in the cultural landscape was forever altered. While the public grappled with these unsettling developments, Washington, D.C. offered a rare piece of hopeful news. On May 20th, President Bill Clinton signed the National Voter Registration Act into law. Also known as the Motor Voter Law, it was designed to make the voter registration process simpler and more accessible by allowing citizens to register when applying for or renewing a driver's license. The legislation was hailed as a victory for democracy, aiming to boost voter turnout by removing logistical barriers, especially for young and low-income Americans. For many, it represented a step toward a more inclusive political process. Though, in true bureaucratic fashion, it also meant longer waits and more paperwork at already overburdened DMVs. Still, amid a season of strange illnesses and celebrity scandal, the passage of the act offered at least one reason for optimism. June 11, 1993, marked a cultural turning point that swept across the western United States and beyond. On that day, Steven Spielberg's blockbuster, Jurassic Park, roared into theaters, introducing audiences to a level of special effects that had never been seen before. From the rainy sidewalks of Portland to the sun-baked boulevards of Pasadena, lines wrapped around theaters as people eagerly waited to witness the jaw-dropping spectacle of lifelike dinosaurs brought to life through cutting-edge CGI and animatronics. For many, it wasn't just a movie. It was an unforgettable experience that redefined what summer blockbusters could be and pushed the limits of cinematic technology into new territory. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, the city's hockey dreams skidded to a halt as the Kings, led by Wayne Gretzky, reached the Stanley Cup final for the first time in franchise history, but fell short of hoisting the trophy. The Montreal Canadiens bested them in a hard-fought series, dashing hopes of a championship and leaving the Kings and their fans grappling with what-ifs and near misses. Despite the loss, the Kings' playoff run energized the city and helped cement hockey's place in the Southern California sports landscape. A few hundred miles east, the desert heat in Phoenix was matched only by the fire and intensity of the NBA Finals. Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns had clawed their way through the postseason with heart and grit, carrying the hopes of a franchise and a fan base that had never tasted a championship. But standing in their way was a dynasty in full force, the Chicago Bulls, led by the seemingly unstoppable Michael Jordan. On June 20th, Game 6 came down to the wire, with John Paxson's three-point shot sealing the Bulls' victory and completing their third consecutive title. It was heartbreak for Phoenix, a city left stunned and silent after coming so close, but it also marked a moment of pride. The Suns had gone toe-to-toe with one of the greatest teams in basketball history and pushed them to the brink, earning respect even in defeat. On July 1st, a horrifying act of violence shattered the relative calm of downtown San Francisco. John Ferry, a mentally unstable man with a long-standing grudge against the legal system, walked into a busy law office and opened fire without warning. The attack was brutal and swift. 8 people lost their lives, and several others were injured before Ferry turned the gun on himself. The massacre sent shockwaves through the city and beyond, dominating headlines and sparking an outpouring of grief and anger. In the aftermath, California's lawmakers and community leaders faced mounting pressure to address the state's gun laws, which many critics viewed as dangerously lenient. The tragedy became a flashpoint in the ongoing debate over firearms regulation, reigniting public demand for stricter background checks, better mental health interventions, and tighter control of assault-style weapons. San Francisco, known for its advocacy and activism, became a focal point in the national conversation as residents organized vigils, marches, and town hall meetings demanding action. Just a few weeks after the San Francisco shooting, President Bill Clinton introduced one of his administration's most polarizing policies. Don't ask, don't tell. Announced on July 19th, the new policy was presented as a compromise intended to resolve the contentious issue of whether openly gay individuals should be allowed to serve in the U.S. military. The policy essentially allowed gay service members to remain in the armed forces as long as they did not disclose their sexual orientation. And in return, military leadership was not to inquire. In the western United States, reactions to the policy were sharply divided. In more conservative areas, particularly in rural regions and some military communities, the policy was seen as a reluctant concession to liberal pressure and met with quiet approval or cautious optimism. But in progressive urban centers like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle, the mood was more critical. Many gay rights advocates and civil rights groups viewed Don't Ask, Don't Tell not as progress, but as a betrayal, an official endorsement of silence and shame. Protests, editorials, and rallies unfolded across the West, calling for a more honest and inclusive approach to military service. While the policy may have been pitched as a middle ground to many in the West, it only reinforced the reality that true equality was still out of reach. On August 4th, 2 of the Los Angeles Police Department officers involved in the brutal beating of Rodney King were sentenced to 30 months in federal prison for violating King's civil rights. The sentences were met with widespread disappointment and anger, particularly among communities that had already been shaken by the 1992 LA riots. Many had expected harsher penalties, and when the comparatively light sentences were announced, renewed protests erupted in several neighborhoods across Los Angeles. Though not as widespread or violent as the riots the year before, these demonstrations reflected a lingering sense of injustice and frustration with the legal system's handling of police brutality. Later in the month, something very different captured the nation's attention, especially among its youngest citizens. On August 28th, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers made its television debut, exploding onto the airwaves and almost instantly becoming a cultural phenomenon. Kids from Seattle to San Diego were glued to their screens, enthralled by the show's mix of brightly colored costumes, over-the-top villains, and choreographed martial arts battles. Toy stores across the West Coast would soon see shelves cleared of Power Ranger merchandise as the show launched a full-blown craze that extended well beyond its Saturday morning time slot. Meanwhile, in a historic moment for American Catholics, World Youth Day was held in the United States for the first time, bringing Pope John Paul II to Denver, Colorado. The event, which took place in mid-August, drew hundreds of thousands of young people from across the country and around the world. Denver became a spiritual and cultural hub for a few days, as crowds gathered for prayer, music, and celebration under the Rocky Mountain sky. The Pope's presence and message of faith and unity left a lasting impression on the city and on a generation of young Catholics who had never experienced such a massive religious gathering on American soil. Bill Nye the Science Guy made its energetic debut on September 10th, instantly capturing the imaginations of kids across the western United States and beyond. With his quirky bow tie, infectious enthusiasm, and fast-paced experiments, Bill Nye turned what might have been another dry educational program into must-see TV. In classrooms and living rooms from Portland to Phoenix, children began mimicking his catchphrases and tuning in religiously. Science rules wasn't just a slogan. It became a rallying cry for a generation of curious young minds who finally saw science as something exciting, hands-on, and even cool. While Nye was busy making atoms, gravity, and chemical reactions household concepts, Hurricane Gert was churning far off the Pacific coast. Though the storm didn't make landfall in the western U.S., its massive presence was a powerful reminder of nature's unpredictability. Meteorologists kept a close eye on its movement, and the public followed updates with unease, aware that even distant storms can shift unexpectedly and bring dangerous ripple effects. It was one of several atmospheric events that year that underscored how quickly the weather could turn, especially along the vulnerable edges of the Pacific Rim. September also brought a burst of animated color to Saturday mornings with the premieres of Animaniacs and Rocko's Modern Life. Animaniacs, with its rapid-fire humor, clever pop culture references, and chaotic charm, found a devoted audience in both kids and nostalgic adults who appreciated its Looney Tunes-inspired energy. Meanwhile, Rocko's Modern Life leaned into its quirky, surreal tone, telling the story of a mild-mannered wallaby navigating the absurd challenges of suburban life in a way that felt oddly relatable. These shows didn't just entertain, they helped define 90s animation and would remain cultural touchstones long after their original runs ended. For Western audiences, September 1993 marked the start of a new golden age of children's television. In the final days of October, Southern California faced a devastating series of wildfires that tore through neighborhoods with alarming speed and intensity. Fueled by dry vegetation, high temperatures, and relentless Santa Ana winds, the fires consumed everything in their path, ultimately destroying more than 700 homes across the region. Entire communities were forced to evacuate with little notice, and firefighters battled around the clock in difficult terrain to contain the blazes. The skies turned an eerie orange, ash rained down like snow, and the air was thick with smoke. For many residents, it was a harrowing reminder of nature's unpredictability and the increasing severity of fire season in the West. By the time the flames were subdued, neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble, and thousands of lives were upended. It was a scorching, destructive conclusion to California's fire season, and a stark warning of what was becoming an annual threat. Only days later, just as the smoke began to clear, a different kind of tragedy struck. This one centered in the heart of Hollywood. On the night of October 31st, Halloween revelers crowded the streets of West Hollywood, unaware that one of the most promising young actors of his generation was living out his final moments just steps away. River Phoenix, known for his intense performances and soulful presence on screen, collapsed outside the Viper Room, a nightclub partially owned by Johnny Depp, after suffering a fatal drug overdose. He was only 23 years old. News of his sudden death sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and the wider cultural landscape. Phoenix, who had been hailed as the voice of a generation and a rising star with limitless potential, had struggled privately with the pressures of fame and substance abuse. His passing cast a dark shadow over an otherwise festive night and left a gaping hole in the hearts of fans, friends, and fellow artists. In Los Angeles, particularly among the city's creative and alternative scenes, the loss was deeply personal. River Phoenix wasn't just a celebrity, he represented a rare blend of talent, sensitivity, and promise. His death marked not just the end of a young life, but the extinguishing of a unique light in Hollywood's constellation. The Food Network made its national debut in November 1993, quickly finding an audience among the growing number of home cooks, aspiring chefs, and food lovers across the western United States. From the artisanal kitchens of San Francisco to the coffee-fueled culinary circles of Seattle, viewers were tuning in to watch cooking shows that brought gourmet techniques and everyday recipes right into their living rooms. It wasn't just about recipes. It was entertainment, education, and culture, all served on a platter. This was the beginning of food TV becoming a major part of pop culture, and the West Coast was among the first to embrace it fully. At the same time, on the tech front, Microsoft released Windows 3.11, a network-ready upgrade to its operating system that further solidified the company's dominance in the PC world. In Silicon Valley, developers, IT professionals, and early internet pioneers greeted the update with enthusiasm. It offered better networking capabilities and smoother performance. Small but meaningful steps in a rapidly evolving digital landscape. As offices and homes became increasingly connected, the release marked another key moment in the tech revolution that the West was helping to drive. Meanwhile, major political and legislative moves unfolded on the national stage, with far-reaching implications for the country and beyond. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, passed in Congress, setting the stage for increased economic integration between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. For Western states with major ports, agricultural exports, and cross-border commerce, like California and Arizona, this was especially significant, opening new markets and sparking both hope and controversy. In Washington, D.C., another historic milestone occurred when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was officially sworn in as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Her confirmation marked a powerful moment not only in legal history, but also in American cultural consciousness, especially in liberal circles throughout the Western U.S., where her advocacy for gender equality and civil liberties resonated strongly. Finally, President Bill Clinton signed the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act into law. The legislation mandated background checks for handgun purchasers and imposed a waiting period, aiming to curb the ease of firearm access and reduce gun violence. The bill stirred passionate debate across the West, particularly in states like California, where high-profile mass shootings had already sparked calls for stricter gun control. In rural areas, however, the response was more divided, reflecting the region's long-standing tensions between safety concerns and Second Amendment rights. NASA launched a high-stakes mission on December 2nd to repair a critical optical flaw in the Hubble Space Telescope, an effort that had been years in the making. The shuttle Endeavour carried a crew of astronauts into orbit, and the operation was both delicate and daring, involving multiple spacewalks to fix one of the most ambitious scientific instruments ever launched. It was a much-needed triumph for NASA and for the scientific community at large, especially after early criticism of the telescope's performance. The successful repair marked a turning point, restoring faith in American space exploration and sparking new enthusiasm for discovery in classrooms, laboratories, and observatories across the western United States and beyond. Meanwhile, back on Earth, and particularly in California, the economic forecast was beginning to look a little less grim. After several tough years, the job market was starting to rebound. The national unemployment rate fell to 6.5% in December, the lowest it had been since early 1991. Western states, especially those along the Pacific coast, led the way in job creation, driven by booming industries like tech, entertainment, and a resurgent real estate sector. Silicon Valley was beginning to buzz again, and cities like Portland and Denver saw fresh signs of growth and investment. Optimism wasn't universal, but it was in the air. Looking back, 1993 in the western United States was a wild blend of contradictions. Brutal and beautiful, hopeful and heartbreaking. It was a year shaped by high-profile trials, strange new illnesses, cultural shifts, and landmark political moves. From brutal crimes to boundary-pushing art, from deadly viruses in the desert to blockbuster movies that broke new ground. It was a time of collision between old fears and new ideas. The region, with its wide-open landscapes and constantly shifting cultural terrain, remained restless as ever, torn between promise and peril, contradiction and progress, but always pushing forward into the unknown, ready or not.
Joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the next, we're here just for you, for you.